let me introduce the first of the patient speakers, and that will be Wendy Barakowitz. I don't know, did I get the name right? And who is going to sit in the high chair, which is not as high as it was when we began. Marcel, do you want to come and help us, or are you going to take a stool?
I'll take the stool. Sure.
No, I think we got.
I can stand for some of it too. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just have to get to my presentation.
Let me do it. Yeah.
Oh, thank
Okay, you
you.
good? That was really good.
Yeah?
So that's you,
That's me.
and you're going to be okay over there.
Yep.
No, next one. That's it. Perfect.
Thank you. This is also a lesson in PowerPoint as well. Thank you. So first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to be here. Thank you, Lauren. Louder. Okay. Just holler if you can't hear me. So before I talk a little bit about my life before POTS, 5 years ago, I was begging doctors to listen to me, to hear what I had to say. And now today, the irony, thank you, Lauren Stiles, for allowing me to be here among this esteemed group to listen to my journey about POTS. So my life before POTS, my family and I moved to Rye, New York. We had stints in New York City and Hoboken. My future seemed very bright. I was married to my husband, Mitch. I still am married to him. And at the time, I had a 5-year-old son named Braden. I was a very active woman. I worked at a very fast-paced advertising agency in New York City. We were just settling into our new home, and I became pregnant via IVF with my second son, Blake, at the age of 39. So I had some, prior to my diagnosis with POTS, I did have some what I call health annoyances that included being diagnosed with celiac in 2008. I always had trouble waking up in the morning. I felt just fatigued a lot. My friends would always just say I was just very sensitive. I instinctively always crossed my legs, and I learned later that actually lowers your heart rate. Is that true? Sometimes. I had stints of anxiety and depression. And a very strange symptom that I had over the years prior to my diagnosis was I felt water dribbling on my legs, running down my legs, and I would go to wipe it off, and there would be nothing there. My legs would be dry. So 2011 was my major year of change. I was pregnant with my second son, and I was placed on precautionary bed rest. I started having contractions at 15 weeks, and I was on bed rest from 15 weeks until almost 40 weeks. 1 week before I gave birth, I was given the clearance to move around. Aside from being deconditioned, and we've used that word a lot today, I had a difficult time moving around once I was given the clearance to move up, to get up and move around. Every time I would stand up, I felt like I needed to sit down. I literally felt my heart rate just beating outside of my chest. I would take my heart rate, it was 150, 160, just from sitting to standing. I knew something was very wrong. I'd been pregnant before. No, I'd never been on bed rest before. No, I'd never been that deconditioned before, but I knew something was wrong. I literally felt the blood flow drain from my head to my uterus to my belly. And I felt thankful after my diagnosis that I was pregnant because I actually felt these symptoms. I physiologically felt the symptoms. So what did I do? I went to my trusted friend Google, and I Googled my symptoms. And the first thing that came up was POTS. And I said to my husband, I said, I think I have this. And he said, no, there's no way you have this. And I said, okay. But a light bulb went off for me, and I knew my body, and I'd been pregnant before. So I went to my primary care physician. I said, I know I'm pregnant, but I know something is wrong. My heart rate is skyrocketing. I started to see floaters in my vision. I started experiencing other symptoms, which I'll talk a little bit on the next slide. But my primary care physician didn't know what POTS was. I actually saw him go into his office and Google it and look up and come back in and said, well, if you have POTS, and I knew I had POTS. And I even went to my OB/GYN at that point, and I said, something's wrong. My heart rate is very high. She said, come in, sit down. I'll take your blood pressure. I'll take your heart rate. And I was sitting down while she took my heart rate and my blood pressure. And it was fine at that time. So yeah, we're laughing. I wasn't laughing then. But so I gave birth to my son, and literally overnight lost the ability to function. In the hospital, literally, my resting heart rate, 150 to 160, intense dizziness, seeing floaters, horrible fatigue. I know I was deconditioned. I know I had just given birth. They call it labor, but I knew it was different from my first birth. Nausea and vomiting, gastrointestinal issues, insomnia. They'd give me a sleeping pill in the hospital. Here I was supposed to be spending time and bonding with my newborn baby who was in the nursery because I was so worried about what was happening to my body and my inability to function. I couldn't even walk. I couldn't even get from the bed to the bathroom on my own. So they were nice enough to call in a cardiologist because I kept telling the nurses something was wrong. Something was wrong with my heart rate. So they called in a cardiologist who hooked me up to a holster, walked me around the maternity ward, and I passed my baby who was in the nursery, and my heart rate exceeded 180. And the machine actually went off and was buzzing and buzzing. And I looked at her in fear, and she said, "Oh no, it's fine. You just had a baby. You're fine. You don't have POTS. Only teenagers get POTS. 39-year-old pregnant women who just gave birth to a baby do not get POTS." And that is simply untrue. This frustration that I felt about not getting properly diagnosed, the lack of information in the medical community of POTS, deeply affected me. I had such fear. I had such anxiety. The self-diagnosis by the medical community, it was insulting that they told me that I had chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety, postpartum depression. They weren't validating my POTS as a possibility at all. The numerous doctors that I saw, cardiologists, neurologists, primary care physicians, psychiatrists, even a postpartum specialist, because I thought, you know what, maybe I do have postpartum. Maybe I had self-doubt. Maybe I was wrong, but I knew my body, and I knew it was POTS. After repeated misdiagnosis from numerous highly rated New York City medical institutions, I was doled out anti-anxiety medications and antidepressant medications, and the diagnosis always came back as postpartum depression. I had been postpartum before. I had had a baby before. This was very, very different. I couldn't hold my baby. I had to lay on the floor and hold him and rock him on the floor. I had to move his whole dressing table down on the ground just so I could rock him to sleep. I was afraid to even hold him standing up in fear that I was going to fall down and faint. So the diagnosis was postpartum. I sought out from my husband, who agreed, said maybe we should see a postpartum specialist, which I did. And this postpartum specialist, she made me write down 10 times. I should have brought the piece of paper because I have it at home. She made me write down 10 times, "I do not have POTS, I do not have POTS, I do not have POTS." How insulting for a patient who could barely walk, who could barely stand, who could barely function. So my husband knew a cardiologist all the way out in New Jersey, 2 hours away. He was a friend of ours. And he said, "Bring her in, let me take a look at her." So I remember the drive there, barely, because I was sleeping almost half the way. I could barely get myself out of bed, even into the car, even from the car to the office. And I saw him, and he did some diagnostic threshold tests in the office. He had me sit up, lay down, take my blood pressure, take my heart rate. He had me squat. He had me stand, and he did this for 15 minutes consecutively. He was standing, sitting, squatting, standing, laying down, standing almost for 10 minutes. And the conclusion was, I did have POTS. Hallelujah. I looked at my husband. I didn't know whether to cry. I didn't know whether to hug this doctor, but I said to my husband, I told you I had POTS. So how do I proceed from here? He prescribed extensive exercise, get my heart rate up, drink copious amounts of fluid, add extra salt to my diet. But all I had was fear and anxiety about how was I going to accomplish all these things. I had a newborn baby, a then 5-year-old, and I couldn't function. So it was a lot of trial and error, very small increments. But as Lauren Stiles knows me very well, I'm not a small increment type of person. And neither is really my husband. So he said, let's try P90X. Does anyone know what P90X is? So P90X, a very intense cardiovascular orthostatic exercise. I said, yes, let's go for it. Let's just do it because this doctor said I need to exercise. So we get home, and the next day I wake up. He said, well, you want to try it? I said, yeah, I want to try it. And first I was vomiting in the bathroom, let me just say that. And I maybe got 10 seconds into it before I said, you know what, this isn't going to work for me. This is not the way I'm going to get exercise in. So what was I going to do? I had 2 small children. I had a husband. I had a life. And I decided I was going to swim because swimming, you're horizontal. I learned later that your heart rate is 20% lower in the water. And when you're in the water, you don't feel like you have POTS. So I did it. I said, okay, the next day, I found a pool. I joined my local YMCA and I got into the water. But just the trip from my house, people who have POTS understand this, just from my house to the car, to the Y, to the dressing room, getting into my bathing suit, walking down that long hallway to the pool, even getting into the pool. But once I got into the pool, I instantly felt wonderful. I felt like I didn't have POTS. The anti-gravity of the water just helped me so tremendously. But I could only do one lap that day, and that was okay because I at least felt like, wow, maybe I have found something here. Maybe I have something that could help ameliorate some of my symptoms. So I swam every day. The first day, lap 1. Second day, lap 2. Kept going, kept going. And we forward to 6 months. And I swam every single day. And I mean every single day, even on Christmas, when my YMCA was closed, I'd go down to the Marriott Hotel down the street from where I live. And I'd say, I have a medical condition. Can I use your pool? They welcomed me every year with open arms and said, absolutely, you can use our pool. At this point, I was swimming every day. I was still working on my daily regime of health. Some of my symptoms, a lot of them did subside at this point. So this is 6 months later, but there was others that were still troubling. I was still having trouble standing for periods of time. I was still having trouble walking long distances. I was still experiencing some gastrointestinal issues. I was still experimenting with medications, as we've talked about, Zoloft, metoprolol, trazodone, and even Xanax. Year 2 and 3. So I figured out how to get salt, Celtic salt especially. I drink 1 teaspoon of warm Celtic salt every single morning, and that just gets my blood pressure right up for the day. 68 ounces of water, additionally adding salt and drinks to my food. By the way, I don't have to add the salt anymore to my food or my drinks. The teaspoon in the morning is all I need now. And I finally made the trip to see Dr. Blair Grubb at the University of Toledo in Ohio. And he was wonderful. And he said to me, you know, the swimming is wonderful. It's great. Keep doing it. He said, I'd love to see you do more out of the water exercise. That's what's going to help you out of the water and help you orthostatically. So as Lauren knows, if someone tells me to do something, I will do it. So I got home, got off the plane, and went to the gym the next day. Instead of taking the left to go to the pool, I took a right and went up the stairs to the fitness center. By the way, I was so out of breath by the time I got up those stairs. I was like, I don't think I'd be able to do this. And I walked into the fitness center and I looked at the treadmill, I looked at the recumbent bike, and I looked at the rowing machine. And most people would say, let's just start slow, Wendy. Let's just do the recumbent bike. I went right to the treadmill. And at the time, I just started very slowly. I could do 1 minute at a time, and that was it for the first day. 1 minute at a 1% incline. That was all I could do. That was all I could do after swimming for 2 years and building up enough stamina and enough strength in my mass muscles to get there. So here's my life today. Daily cardio exercise. I exercise every day for 30 minutes, and that is on the treadmill. I work out 3 days a week with a trainer, doing circuit training, building core strength, and weight-bearing exercises to help build that large muscle mass, which helps pump the blood back up to your heart and your head where it belongs. I walk 5+ miles a day. Reiki, I practice Reiki once a week. I meditate regularly. In between this period of this 5-year window, I went back to school and earned a degree in integrative nutrition, and I have my own practice today where I help people with chronic illness and even POTS patients who have trouble getting from here to here. So how can doctors help? Lauren talked about this. Awareness, knowing about POTS and dysautonomia is the first step to helping patients. Early diagnosis is so key. POTS is such a puzzle. Recognizing these uncorrelated and multiple symptoms can greatly help improve POTS patients by improving and figuring out a correct protocol early on. And every POTS patient is different. POTS patients will often say, well, I'm exercise intolerant. I can't exercise. I was exercise intolerant. We all are in the beginning. But small increments. For some people, it's this heavy-duty cardiovascular exercise that wasn't going to work for me, and it didn't work for me. Knowledge is such power. Giving tips to patients can be so impactful by adding the salt and fluid intake, proper nutrition. Pursuing exercise in a moderate way can really help ameliorate some of the acute symptoms. The medical community just wasn't aware at my time, and thank God I listened to my body, and thank God I had the oomph to say, you know what? No, I do have POTS. And there were things I could do to help ameliorate my system. So my goal is to bring awareness to the general population and doctors and raise funds and research for POTS, incorporating POTS and dysautonomia in medical schools in the curriculum and statewide tests, inform patients about lifestyle changes, nutrition, and exercise. For example, I eliminated gluten from my diet. I eliminated dairy. I eliminated refined sugars, all of which I talk about in my nutrition practice with people who suffer from chronic acute autoimmune conditions. So here's my life today. Life reclaimed. Yes, I think I have reclaimed my life. I'm not to say that I don't go through bouts and I don't have some symptoms, daily symptoms day to day. I do, but I would say I have about 90% of my life back and reclaimed. Thank you.
Well, that's terrific. It's so wonderful to hear a success story and expressed so clearly, and leaves us all thinking about how we can do these things better so that more people can recover as much as you have.